Hey, welcome to Craig News O Tech. Today we're going to talk about why Linux, how Linux, private mobile OS. Let's go ahead and get started. So first I kind of want to talk about my tech philosophy. Throughout my life, I've always appreciated some sort of control, some sort of understanding, freedom, the idea that the data is mine. I want it to be private and secure. Privacy is a human right to me, and I want this to encapsulate inside my digital life. We use computers for a vast variety of reasons, and that is privacy is probably the one most important thing to me, which has dictated the choices of my personal tech stack. To me, boring is good. I want something that is not going to be over dramatic and something that I can change and something that is minimal to be able to control. And I also want something to be automated. So I've taken the slide from whyprivacymatters.org. You should check it out. If you don't already realize why privacy matters, I would suggest doing some deep thinking about this. The way I like to put it is, do you really want someone? We all have blinds on our house, and there's a reason why we have that. So kind of think about it with your digital life. Before I dive into this, I want to talk about how I got to where I am today. I graduated with an undergrad from Illinois State University. I originally wanted to like business and music type stuff, but right after that, I got into computers. The way I got into computers was when I was growing up. I was very interested in just surfing on the web and playing games on my PC, and it was some Windows variant at the time. My computer was very slow, so I decided to find alternative programs that had a lower memory footprint, and I started installing those on my Windows machine. And then over time, I realized that they were open source, and I realized that I could replace the entire operating system. So I went ahead and did that, and the one I found first was Linux Mint. But since then I've tried dozens of them, we'll call it distro hopping, as it were. And that's kind of how I got to Linux. There was this one point where I had two previous laptops ago, around just before 2011, I had some blue screens of death, and that's a Windows term for when the system just panics and something's wrong. Could not figure it out for the life of me and restored. And then one day I just woke up and installed Linux Mint on it, and it's just been working ever since. And it's still a machine that I can use today. It's my one machine that still has a CD drive. So that's kind of where I am, my little journey to today. So we're going to take a look at reasons why you would want to use Linux. But first, let's take a look at what it actually is. It's a kernel. It is not just the operating system. It's a piece of the operating system. And a kernel is simply the software that talks to the hardware. This is typically known as GNU Linux. And I'm not going to get deep into the history here because the scope of this talk is to give you my perspective and opinions and give you examples of things that I find very useful in my daily driver life. But yeah, it's uses software from the GNU project, which is why it's GNU, and it was written by Linus Torvalds in 1991. And this is just giving you the idea of that it is a kernel, and this is the piece that primarily we're talking about when we talk about Linux. But mostly people, they just kind of shorten it to be Linux, and they're referring to a whole slew of different things, Ubuntu being one of them. You don't really need to take a great look at this slide. This is just kind of give you an idea of the history and where the lineage of Linux came from. You can see over here, it's kind of has a close relationship to Minix, which is a different architected kernel, and that you can just look that up and understand that Linus Torvalds kind of took ideas from Minix and made Linux his own. So yeah, I do want to point out there's a lot more information about the history, and people do a way better explanation than I ever will. John Schaumann, believe I'm saying his name correctly. He is a professor at Stevens, and check out his site, and he open sourced all of his courses, and they're probably the best courses I've ever found on modern operating systems and also advanced programming in the Unix environment, if that's stuff that interests you. So continuing on to my reasons. My first reason is it's free, and free as in freedom and free as in beer, meaning it's tangibly free, and it's also free as in you have the freedom to do whatever you please. This is because it is what we refer to as open source under the GNU General Public License. The code can always be seen at kernel.org. You have a choice. You can share this, you can customize it, and there's no vendor lock-in, and there's no walled gardens, and there's nobody telling you exactly what you can do. You can take the code as you will and make your own modifications. So either you can do that, or a group of people can do that, or a company can do that, or whomever can do that. It's simple, kind of like this slide. This is a perspective and an opinion, but to me it's very simple, going from using Windows and then using Mac at a job and then being only on Linux to this day. I also use Ubuntu for my workflow for both my company, my day job, and everything I do. So it's just once you understand it and once you start using it, it just feels very simple to use, and it doesn't get bothered. You don't get bogged down by things. So security and privacy, this will vary. Mileage will vary based on the distribution, and there's a lot of arguments against what if Linux is actually that secure to begin with, versus things like BSD and the like. But I would say that overall it is going to be just based on the Unix permissions and all the stuff under the hood. It is a lot more private and secure than any other mainstream desktop environments or servers that you would use. Just an example, like Canonical, they're not going to ask you for your personal information just to install it like other operating systems might. And it's just kind of the trust in the community and the company and yourself and the non-for-profits that you have. You're able to audit the code since it's open sourced, and these are kind of things that make it secure and private. And one thing that I always tell people is to be wary of the software that you run. That is going to matter a lot more than the actual operating system itself, because the software is ultimately where you put the data and where you make choices about things that you input and gain output. SelfHost. This is a big community. One of the podcasts I like to listen to from time to time is selfhosted.show. They give a lot of cool tips and hints and get you started on projects and things that you can do at home. But self-host, it's not just doing the infrastructure yourself, but it's also trusting other people to do it for you. The idea of, I don't self-host my own email. I use Proton Mail, and there's other options out there. You just have to be aware of things that that you can either self-host yourself or pay someone to do it for you. It's either going to be your time or it's going to be your own finances that put the value into what you're getting back. It's fun. I don't know about you, but the reason I kind of got involved with computers is just to tinker around, to have fun, to hack on stuff, to build things, break things. I highly suggest checking out this book called Just for Fun, written by Linus Torvalds and David Diamond. It's a fantastic book. It's for work and business. Just look at companies. Open source is eating the world, as they say, and billions of dollars are built upon this, and it's not going anywhere. Even if blockchain is to take over a little more so, that's open source too. So Linux is kind of a similar thing to that, but years before the blockchain stuff. I'm not going to go through all these bullet points, but it saved money for your computer system. It's proven open source software, and in the real enterprise, there's tons of data points that support this. And servers are mostly Linux now. 100% of all supercomputers are Linux. Containers are based on them. Developing software, usually you do that with Linux tools, and it's a great workflow for developers and engineers. And now Linux is even kind of Windows, and it's encouraged to use it inside of Microsoft Windows, which is very interesting to me. And I would love to talk to other people about why to do that and why not just run Linux yourself. But anyways, and it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So education, you probably can't go find a computer science degree that will not touch on Linux. And it's a great way to repurpose laptops. A lot of hardware out there today is kind of expensive, just due to sheer supply and demand. So if you can buy an older machine and throw a Linux distribution on it, I recommend that, and it'll just work. I prefer Intel based, but we'll get more to those details in a little bit. And you can find a curated list of resources that I've liked over the last decade at craignusa.tech/Linux. Community. It's not just Linux being a thing, but it's kind of built this community around it. Some great examples are Arch Linux, great Wikipedia, great people over there to help you out and answer your questions. Debian's and also a great place to check out. There's conferences, IRC, Discords, mailing lists. Just type things in and you will find them. A place there I kind of started my journey was the Linux Action Show, which is unfortunately defunct now, but there's other great blogs and YouTube channels out there, and I will get to some more resources at the end of this talk, so stay tuned. Innovation, it's the ability to use many tools and build out a product in any industry. You can take it and do what you want with it. You can do custom use cases. Every business is different, and not every business does software the same, so you need some sort of system to run those programs that you do and customize them in a way. This slide's kind of fun. I'll just give you a second to pause or read it, but it's just kind of a fun thing. Like, it kind of represents my whole personality, as well as just kind of, yeah, we take things seriously, but really it's just to have fun, and just because we can, and because it's our control, and I like working with people that are similar to that kind of mindset. All right, so let's get on to how Linux. First thing you need is a piece of hardware. Really, anything will run on it. I personally recommend Intel based, and I personally don't like dedicated GPUs. It's just extra overhead I don't game. If you're looking to game on Linux, there's tons of other channels out there. Check out like Linux Gamer or something like that. But anyways, yeah, you can just be Intel based and run. Some manufacturers I tell people to check out are System76, Dell, and Lenovo. They have some great options there, and everything over there is going to run for you. The Framework laptop is something that's new, and it's kind of on my radar to check out. But I know that will run Linux well, and it's very highly rated for repairability. Or you can build your own desktop. Take this advantage to learn how a computer works, and then you can learn how your operating system works, and just take it from there. And Ubuntu and Arch, they both have great hardware compatibility guides out on their documentation. So I've done a bunch of different distros, but I'm still always been a fan of Ubuntu. It's easy to use. It's a minimal install option if you like, and it's got a nice built-in package manager. But when you install programs, you can do it from the package manager, but I would highly suggest checking out the developer maintainer site, like their GitHub or their documentation, and how they recommend you find the latest supported version of whatever software you're using. Snaps is a good option. I'm not a huge fan, but it's something that works, and if it's well supported by the maintainer, they typically do a pretty good job. Dual booting, I don't recommend dual booting. There's just a lot of different headaches, but it works if you need to. I recommend just having two different machines if you need to run a different OS. And yeah, there's also a very easy to use GUI UI, if you will, or store for beginners afraid of the CLI, and that just kind of does the package managing under the hood, and anyone can really use that. So installing, it's pretty easy. I'm not going to walk through how to do that. There's tons of other videos on that, but you can just head over to here and grab an image and install. This is kind of what my desktop looked like at the time. Yeah, I just like to keep it clean. I like to change up my desktop's wallpapers from time to time just to give me a new view onto things while I'm working. And we will get at the meat of it. So some desktop applications, as I mentioned before, there's some installation methods here, apt snap, or you can just do like a deb file, which is the equivalent to like an exe or a DMG on Mac. And these are kind of the following applications I use and that I've vetted over the years. I've been using VLC for a very long time. I use Signal. It's my chosen encrypted communication. Discord, I just kind of use kind of like where friends and community has gone. Not my first choice, but it's something that I use and it's fine. Not from a privacy angle, but it's probably a little bit more than other applications out there. VS Codium, something I use. It's the code editor. It's the VS Code version without telemetry. Highly recommend that. Molvad is my VPN of choice. I do use Zoom at my day job, but if I'm trying to do some chats with other people, I typically go over to Jitsi. Don't have that listed here, but you can check out Jitsi. Just do a web search for it. I've tried to switch away from Docker, so I like build on Podman. Chromium I use for web browsing testing. I'm a huge Firefox user. It's not on the slide, but it's included with Ubuntu, so you don't really need to worry about installing it if you're doing the normal Ubuntu install. Standard Notes, I love Standard Notes. It works. It's installed by an app image, and that is just, you can check out app image on your own, but that's basically just a way to run Linux piece of software on basically all the distributions with ease. Peak is an animated GIF screen recorder. I use that all the time to kind of show people little code snippets or things on my screen. And SyncThing is fantastic. It's a file synchronization. And for most of these are very highly rated for privacy and security, and they are all open source. Obviously I don't think Discord is, but it's well supported on the Linux platform. So on to the private mobile OS, which may be something that is new to you. And this is kind of the meat of my talk and the kind of my experience in the last year. So I want to go through this. So options out there. This screenshot here is taken from privacyguides.org. You can check them out. I highly recommend checking them out on your own time. So why not Lineage? Although Lineage gives you root permissions, it does have a major drawback in my opinion, which is that unlike GrapheneOS, LineageOS has to run with the bootloader unlocked. GrapheneOS can and recommends relocking the bootloader to run. Also, in the world of Linux, you do not want to run things as root for many reasons, security one of them. So the idea behind Graphene is it gives you a nice operating system that is it's 0% Google, and it is using the what I call the open source version of Android, because it never touches the manufacturer and it never touches Google. So it's a very cool project, and if you're not using it, I highly recommend checking out for your mobile device. And I've been using it for a little over a year now, and I get amazing battery, and highly recommend it. And we will kind of go through a little more details on these next slides. So here's the website. I just kind of took a screenshot of it, and it may look a little different at this point of the screenshot was taken, but it's not like the most user-friendly or flashy website. It's all about the content. It's all about information. So just to kind of give you, hey, this is what it is when you go check it out. And my big thing here is no Google apps or services. So privacy and security focused. It is a non-profit open source project. It's led by one main security researcher, Daniel Mckay, and he's very active. Shout out to him. And I highly recommend donating to the project or getting involved with however you can. I have had 3 to 4 days of battery life on my phone, and it's just fantastic. So here's a little screenshot of what my setup currently looks like. Um, there is a web USB option. I use the CLI option. It probably took me about an hour to do. I went on the internet and I kind of checked out some different sources, both the Hated One and Techlore videos. And after digesting that information, maybe for a day or two, I was able to successfully install it with no problem. But if you do have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to me in the comments or shoot me over a message or wherever. You can find some contact information at my site. Happy to help you out where I can. And it is the Pixel only. I would recommend just going ahead and buying the Pixel 6. I have it running on the 4a right now, but I plan on buying a 6 because it's going to have a nice 5-year security update life. So yeah, and there's I'm not going to get into why just the Pixel, but I mean, it's Google most secure hardware thus far, and you can read some reasons on their FAQ and kind of do your own homework. So post install, I still have Verizon, and after I installed it successfully, I insert the SIM and everything just worked. From there, you're going to want to go to the Vanadium app, which is like the black Google Chrome logo, and head straight over to the F-Droid site and install that. And then we kind of get to my mobile applications. Same with the desktop, I use Signal. I love AntennaPod. Shout out to the Podcast Index 2.0. They feature that in there for my podcast listening. I don't listen to too many podcasts, and perhaps I'll do another video on that someday. But I do have some that I really appreciate. So that's kind of how I install. And I prefer the F-Droid install method, but there are a couple that are APK, which is the Signal and Proton Mail, and they do a fantastic job of updating. And I have no issues with not receiving notifications with my Signal. And I don't want to receive notifications with my mail all the time. So if that's a thing for you, then perhaps this isn't a solution, but I like to use a pull method for my email and check that kind of once or twice a day. DuckDuckGo has a fantastic web browser. Forecasty is kind of the weather thing I use. Bitwarden is a fantastic password manager. I also use that in my Firefox web browser. VLC, I use that for my music. I run all local FLAC music, and I kind of sync that with SyncThing across devices. NewPipe's a great alternative to YouTube. You can kind of like download stuff and check stuff out on the NewPipe. It scrapes the YouTube API. SyncThing, again, file transfers and backups. OSM and is GPS and maps. The GPS isn't the greatest. Maps are pretty good. There's another one I have been using for maps, and let me check to see what that is called real quick. It's not on my list here, but that is Magic Earth. I would check out that one. I've been using that one pretty successfully for actual GPS. And then OTP, use that every day for two-factor authentication. Molvad for my VPN, and the Aurora Store. If you do have to install something that is in the Play Store, that's a great privacy alternative. So those are things that I use. And I also have a Proton Calendar beta that I use Proton Calendar inside of my web browser on my desktop, and then I have an application for it on my phone. So that's kind of what I use on a day-to-day basis for my applications. So a little bit of the future of Linux and mobile Linux and the digital privacy and open source tech, kind of where we're headed. Desktops here, servers here. Many Linux-based mobile OSs are in development. I hope to get off of, not that graphene's a bad thing, but just to get off of the Android entirely and go more over towards a Linux-based mobile OS. Digital privacy companies becoming more apparent in the mainstream, which is a great thing. Core boot to replace firmware, BIOS or UEFI, and a lot of the System 76 machines are starting to have that, so that's a great thing. And then we got RISC-V, which is just moving hardware over to a completely open source computer architecture, which is exciting. So we've been at the desktop, we've been at the server, we're kind of there in the mobile OS, but these are the directions that we're heading, and this is great for tech and computer and taking back your freedom and stuff like that. alternative options, I'm not someone that's just loves Linux and doesn't do the BSDs. I've tried the BSDs and stuff, and those are great too. Hope to one day do like a open source my own from scratch like NAS and router. Just haven't gotten there yet, just for time's sakes. But those are some good options. And Michael W. Lucas is a fantastic person to learn about all that stuff. I have a bunch of his books and highly recommend you checking them out too. Some mobile alternatives. If you don't want to use Graphene, I would suggest checking out Calyx OS, and then LineageOS is the one that supports way more different a variety of phones if price or whatever reason you don't want to use a Pixel. So do check those out, and I can point you in a good direction for guides and stuff on how to install that. So future improvements for this. I hope to script it out for a fresh install on my desktop, probably do like an Ansible thing or maybe a bash script, press of a button. It's pretty simple. If I was to restore my Ubuntu and kind of set everything up from scratch, it doesn't take too long, but something that can do it with a nice press of a button kind of goes back to my tech philosophy is just having things mutable. So that's something to be aware of, and look out for another video I might do on that. Maybe tailor this talk to specific audiences if people want more in-depth, if this was too broad, if this is too general, too detailed. If I suck at talking, just let me know. And maybe I can kind of put this more into a blog post. I think I communicate better writtenly, and there are some things in my blog already to check out that might go into more details that I haven't thought of when I'm just doing this talk right now. Maybe dive technically deeper into Ubuntu and Graphene, and kind of look into decentralization. I've been kind of looking into blockchain and the whole Web 3.0 and Matrix protocol and Mastodon, and kind of moving away from centralized to decentralized, but being wary of what that actually means, and being sure that things can be trusted. Additional resources, there's both privacytools.io, which is one dude now, and there's privacyguides.org, which is a community, which originally was Privacy Tools. I'm not going to get into the drama of all that stuff, but basically I do use both of them to kind of compare. It's kind of nice that two of them exist now. It's nice to have two places to go to and check out, but most of their suggestions will overlap. I do have my craigdusen.tech/Linux that I suggested earlier. And then there's also some pages, How Linux, Why Linux, and My Linux Life Journey, if you want to read about those or share them. GrapheneOS page has a nice outline, quick start guide on how I got up and running with GrapheneOS. And then I highly recommend, I like official documentation. It's kind of like the first place I go. And then I mentioned podcast 2.5 admins.com. Podcast is fantastic if you are interested in doing any sort of system administration. And I just started playing with like a Linode server, and then I'll probably make this a static site and do it. But if you go to fosfun.org, that's actually nothing right now. There is a better page that I have, and I will probably throw that in the comments, and I need to update that. Some talks, some videos, and presentations. These are kind of some shout outs to other people around the YouTube that I like to check out. CS50 is fantastic. If you're getting started in computers, that's the place to start. Even as just a hobbyist or as a career. Level 1 Linux is fantastic. Tutorial Linux, since he started, he inspired me to kind of make this channel. I have an interview over there, so check that out. Usenix, Jupiter Broadcasting, like I mentioned. Live Overflow, which is he's more security minded, but he has some great explanations on how things work under the hood. And Brian Will, he's fantastic at explaining things, computer science, all programming related. So check those out. What's next for you? Well, go install Ubuntu, ask me questions, check stuff out. You can spin up a virtual machine and install it, check that out. Or you can live boot on your own computer. Install GrapheneOS, get off of Google, install Arch, Linux from scratch. You can learn how to customize things and kind of learn how things work. Learn deeply about the Linux file system, Python, CPython, build something, program, a whole bunch of things that you can do. And think about use cases of why you would use Linux and what you would replace to do that, and how and why, and they'll kind of motivate yourself to to start tinkering with the stuff and being involved with your everyday life. I mentioned some digital privacy companies, and this is kind of a list of where I appreciate and watch the work that they're doing. So shout out if you happen to work for one of these places, or if you're possibly hiring, and I always look for new opportunities down the road. So want to throw that out there. And that's all I had, and I'll see you next time.